Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, happy Wednesday. Thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. So looking at election results from Georgia's second primary of the calendar year, which I find kind of awkward. We are looking at subdued turnout numbers. About 1.1 million voters casting ballots yesterday, down almost 50% from 2020, down from 2022. And here we are left to wonder, well, what does this mean for the 2024 election cycle? I think it's pretty clear what this means with regards to what we can expect in 2024 this November. Or should I say this November for the 2024 election cycle. I think we're going to have subdued turnout. The American public, or specifically here in Georgia, and I have not poured over other states' results, just do not have an appetite for participation in our electoral process. I think that's pretty obvious. Also, I was going back and forth with a conservative pundit. I don't know that there's anything to read into this race that you can apply to the general in November, because there weren't many competitive races, specifically here in Metro Atlanta. Yes, there was competition. There were some primary races within both parties. Nothing heated, nothing close, nothing with money on both sides, or from both campaigns, or from multiple campaigns. We had a GOP House seat that had like 4 or 5 combatants on the right. Anyway, nothing with a lot of money. We were not awash with campaign ads every time we turn the television on. You know, the rudimentary stuff that we've come to expect and loathe about a campaign cycle, we weren't inundated with. In Metro Atlanta anyway, and remember, Metro Atlanta is the majority of the voting block in the state of Georgia. We had one contested sort of race, and it was a judicial seat. We don't really get excited about judicial seats as voters. We just don't. In fact, in the state of Georgia, a Supreme Court seat that used to be something that would appear on the ballot all the time has become something of a novelty because of some of the antics on the right to ensure that seats stay on the right by having judges step down a little early so that the governor in office at the time can seat someone, and that someone gets 2 years before they have to run for re-election. I mean, here's the thing. There were actually 4 state Supreme Court seats that were on the ballot yesterday. There was only one who had an opponent. And I'll remind you how rare it is that we even get to vote for Supreme Court justices in the state. This from the AJC a few weeks back. Most justices are appointed to the bench, run as incumbents, and step down before the term ends. The governor then chooses a replacement who runs as an incumbent a year or two later and repeats the cycle. Open Supreme Court races are rare. The last was in 2018 when then Georgia Court of Appeals Judge John Ellington scared off opponents to capture a vacant seat. He's now the only one of 9 justices who wasn't appointed before yesterday's vote, of course. Me being a numbers junkie, I'm waiting for the breakdown. Like, what are we looking at as far as demographics go, demography, age, and race and gender? I can look at the subdued turnout and almost guess what we're going to see. I think we're going to see an older, whiter turnout. I mean, I think the results sort of bear that out. I think you'll find small pockets, and I do mean small pockets, of turnout that may have spiked because of a competitive, county commission seat or state representative race. Obviously, we've got the race for the House district that Misha Maynor currently holds. She, of course, switching parties, and there were 3 or 4 formidable candidates. By the way, Bryce Berry, who had been on this show, won the Democratic nomination. He will face Misha Maynor in the general. So that'll be a competitive race within the state of Georgia. But there really weren't a whole lot of competitive races on the primary ballot for either party. And so here we're looking at subdued turnout. Almost 50% of 2020's turnout. That's the most recent presidential election year. And again, let's also remember this. For whatever reason, Georgia's presidential primary is detached from the primary election we had yesterday. And even that primary was in March. This one's in May. In any event, there's no weight to turnout because, well, gosh, the presidential nominations for both parties were pretty much sewn up by March. So there really was no push to go to the polls to make a decision in that race. We don't really weigh in on that until November. And bless it, batten down the hatches, sit down. It's going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to be inundated with those campaign ads from here to eternity. November. But anyone who wants to read into the John Barrow thing didn't work out, I don't know that there's much to read into that. Honestly, for all of the talk in pundit circles about his advertising campaign and making choice a ballot thing, I honestly think if that was his game plan, it was a late strategy. Seriously, a late strategy. I mean, filing months ago. And really, he only started garnering headlines for making choice an issue. And I get it. You only have so much money when you're campaigning for a Georgia State Supreme Court seat. It's not like he was awash in funds. He only made the splashy headlines and the TV ad buys, which were met, by the way, with TV ad buys by Governor Brian Kemp's PAC, for example, $500,000 spend, like weeks ago. This was not the sort of race that garnered much attention until just weeks ago. I caution anyone who wants to make this a bellwether thing or look at the results. It was a 55-45 turnout. Honestly, I'm a little surprised it was that close. Seriously, there was nothing else on either ballot that drew out people in teeming numbers. And if there's one thing that I think we can all learn about Democrats, if we don't have that marquee race, specifically atop the ballot, man, turnout is tough. It just is. It's tough. It's tough to get people to turn out to vote. I'm working with a congressional candidate in another state as a consultant, and we know that. And we have a primary that'll conclude in a few weeks. And how do I say this? It's almost as if we're deciding to focus on the voters we know are going to turn out, the ones that reliably turn out, and really hammer home the message because we know turnout is going to be super light. So when you look at Georgia's results, you see incumbents really carried it. Fani Willis, she had a primary opponent, Christian Weissmith, but I'm not saying a half-hearted effort on his part. I almost never want to say a candidate makes a half-hearted effort because I'm sure that the candidate makes the full-throated effort. It's the half-hearted monetary support that the candidate gets or volunteer support or, it's very Fani Willis routed Christian Weissmith. Even with all the headlines, and there's a lot of grousing here in Fulton County about her personal affairs and what that may have done to derail the most important case she will ever handle in her career. I mean, it's hard to foresee something more important. Lucy McBath, again, the victim of map redraws, I call it gerrymandering, running for an almost completely different piece of Georgia to stay in Congress. Just smoked her rivals. Willis and McBath had name recognition, as did Scott McAfee, Fulton County Superior Court judge. He easily won his race. Pretty much up and down the ballot, if the name was somewhat well known, or the candidate was an incumbent, it was a fait accompli. Senator Elena Parent, she had a challenger. She won. Sally Harrell beat David Lubin. Representative Terry Nulowitz, who we've had on the show, she had a challenger, a Democratic Socialist-backed candidate by the name of Gabriel Sanchez. Gabriel Sanchez managed to upend Representative Nulowitz. That's a bit of a surprise. I will say, if this is a bellwether for anything, it is a warning sign for those on the left, for the Democratic Party. Because, again, I think you're going to find that yesterday's demography will look decidedly grayer, decidedly wider. While we have Cop City protests, campus protests against the Israel-Gaza conflict, and infighting from everything left of center, the right seems a bit more galvanized, as dysfunctional as they are, and they have their infighting too. But I think we're seeing, and I've warned about this since the Cop City stuff, well before October 7th. I warned about this. If we don't show some sort of an ability to hold dialogue within our ranks on the left, if we continue to dismiss grassroots organizers, specifically the younger ones, they're either going to find themselves too busy to vote or far less invested in trying to maintain the status quo, because polls show that they don't care for the status quo. The under 30 voter has lived through 9/11, 2 wars, a housing crash, a pandemic, a recession, inflation, the Trump presidency. What are they scared of? More to discuss about yesterday's results and what it means for November when the Ron Show returns after this. We put all the show notes in our blog each day when we do a show weekdays, Monday through Friday. Those show notes, those blogs, and listen to the shows in their entirety if you'd like at ronshowatl.com. Trying to see what you can learn from yesterday's primary results, and I just don't know that you can. We do have a J6er who is advancing to a runoff in the 2nd Congressional District in Georgia. Sending our best to Washington, I see. Chuck Hand. Chuck Hand pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge inside the Capitol with his wife. Anyway, he's going to be in a runoff for the GOP nomination up against Wayne Johnson, who was a former Donald Trump administration official. Anyway, that will take place June 18th. The winner will take on current Congressman Sanford Bishop in the Southwest Georgia district that, by most measures, still leans Democratic. What else do we have? We spoke earlier of State Representative Terry Nulowitz and her race. She lost to the Democratic Socialist endorsed candidate, Gabriel Sanchez. Sanchez, with the notoriety of having been a leader in the Atlanta Democratic Socialists' Stop Cop City campaign, which makes you wonder if that participation, again, this is a Smyrna district, so it's not exactly an Atlanta thing, but it may be the canary in the coal mine that shows that a candidate with the support of the under 40 voter would fare better in a general. We'll see. I mean, a state house race at this level, the turnout wasn't fantastic, but maybe listen. I want you to listen to the way he talks and the issues that he's focusing on his website.
Have you heard the news? 3 corporations own more than 19,000 homes in the metro Atlanta area.
Now, who's been telling you about
Researchers have found that 3 companies, Invitation Homes, Pretium Partners, and Amherst, own a significant part of the market in rental communities, especially in communities of color, which gives them huge power to control prices and outprice individuals from getting housing that they deserve. Now, if you listen to the corporate-backed media, they'll tell you that this is just a supply issue, and all we have to do is build more housing and everything will be fixed. But that's not the only part of the issue. We also have all these corporations, Wall Street, and private equity firms buying up property all over the place and jacking up prices to make a profit off of you. Or they buy the housing with the intent of never selling it and making you permanent renters. Because we allow this, we are seeing regular Americans getting priced out of a basic tenet of the American dream, a home. We need to reel in these private corporations from unnecessarily jacking up the price of housing by creating much stricter regulations on speculation, as well as banning major for-profit corporations like Amherst from buying up single-family housing. We also need rent control, much stronger investment in public and affordable housing, and making housing more affordable by removing the requirement for 3 times the rent in order to qualify for a place. We also need to create a program for long-term renters to eventually own the home that they are renting and create a housing first policy to solve our homelessness crisis. So join me in fighting for housing for all by going to SanchezForGeorgia.com to join our campaign. And if you live in Smyrna, Cumberland, or around the Dobbins Air Force Base area, make sure to vote on May 21st. Early voting starts April 29th.
Who's been telling you that housing is the 2024 campaign issue that not enough candidates are talking about? This guy. I know I'm a residential realtor, so maybe I'm just a little more dialed in than most people are, but Gabriel Sanchez just defeated an incumbent Democrat because he made that a key issue, as he did with economic rights.
So what do I mean when I say an economy for all? Well, the mainstream media and rich CEOs love to talk about stocks going up and how great the economy is growing and everything is great. Except most of us don't feel it. They tend to ignore that despite employment going up overall, black workers have experienced 60% more unemployment since 2022 compared to the white counterparts. They ignore the fact that the average family has to earn $9,000 more a year just to live. Most of us are unable to own a home, afford healthcare, or buy the basic things we need. Many of us have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. Why is it that 40 hours a week is no longer enough to live comfortably? Georgia's minimum wage is still $5.15 an hour. We got greedflation where corporations are artificially raising prices just to make more money. Businesses are sacrificing our families and our lives just to make record profits. I work as a waiter as I'm running for office, and I have seen and felt what low wages do to our community. Only 2% of state legislators in this country are working class. It's time to change that. We must stop inequality in our schools. We have to fight to organize our workplaces and end right to work in Georgia. It's time for paid leave for all workers and a $20 minimum wage. Workers are the foundation of this state, and it's time that we are treated with the dignity and respect we deserve. So let's elect a representative who will fight for you. Gabriel Sanchez, May 21st in State House District 42, Smyrna, Cumberland, and Dobbins Air Force Base area. Early voting ends today, May 17th. Make sure to learn more on how to vote at SanchezForGeorgia.com/vote. And if you don't live in the district, volunteer and contribute today.
By the way, these videos that I'm playing for you are off of his, are you sitting down, Gen Xer, Boomer? They're on his TikTok account. A TikTok account, by the way, that has 3,566 followers. You look at his Instagram, you look at his Twitter, X, you look at his Facebook, it's not nearly that. Representative Anulowicz doesn't approach that. And if anything, I think he's the kind of candidate that establishment Democrats need to be paying more attention to. He's not, and don't take this the wrong way, Gabriel, if you're listening. And I, by the way, have invited him on the show, so hopefully we'll have him on soon. He's not the flashiest, GQ, kind of candidate that people swoon over because and run to vote for him because he's, super uber handsome. He just talks about the issues that I have been saying that candidates need to be talking about. Housing, economic rights. He also advocates for health care. He has a stern message of obviously for our public safety and policing in this society. And lo and behold, he's one of the few who took on an incumbent and took down an incumbent by talking about the issues, even in a manner that may not have been flowery for the incumbent party or for the party with the president running for re-election. What is it they say about don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining? Yeah, maybe that's the bellwether. I don't know. More discussion after this. The Ron Show on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, and wherever you podcast.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So I'm somewhere in this middle ground where I kind of understand where a candidate like a Gabriel Sanchez, who's talking about some very real, very affecting the common person voter, where his tactic actually works. I kind of get that. I guess maybe it's my age. I'm also at an age where I understand that while the mainstream media is focusing on the top of the ballot coming in November and the very real danger that comes from allowing someone back into the highest office in the land who, I mean, I'm not even going to say alleged. The dude's a criminal. It's not even debatable. The dude is a criminal. He's a sexual assaulter, and that's not even like for women. Maybe that's the number one thing. He is a sexual assaulter who has admitted as much on a hot mic. Is it not fair that he didn't know it was a hot mic? He still said it. He said it not to himself. He didn't say it in confidence to a friend. He said it to a reporter, a host, or whatever you want to call Billy Bush. The sexual assault, the skirting of payments. How many businesses in New York did we hear from over the decades? He would gum them up in court, knowing that he had the money to pay for attorneys or didn't pay the attorneys. There's a lot of that too, actually. Knowing that he could wear them down and send them off without payment because they didn't have the money to continue fighting the legal battles. There's the fraud, the Trump Foundation fraud, Trump University with the fraudulent education. The man's a criminal. And yet a Gabriel Sanchez decided to take on an incumbent state representative who represented his own party. It's not even as if he was trying to take down a Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Colton Moore or Lauren Daniels, who, by the way, in Locust Grove did lose to a primary opponent. Maybe that's an opportunity for Democrats. I doubt it, but yeah, gerrymandering is what gerrymandering is. So I kind of want to cover all ground when it comes to what it is that good candidates need to be focusing on and what the Democratic Party on the whole needs to be focusing on. It's like they've got a bunch of small brush fires, and then they've got that 3-alarm raging inferno in the factory where all the food and goods are. The fact that the former president, while in a courtroom, he says it's freezing, by the way, bless him, had the time during his lunch break, and I'm not even going to mince words here, had time on his lunch break to re-share a social media post that glorified a new Reich. I mean, that's Nazi dog whistles if ever I heard one, right? The fact that he did it. Let's be honest. He did it. He said it was the unnamed staffer. Oh, the unnamed staffer is always getting fired, right? Only he said at Mar-a-Lago in April that only he and one other person even have access to his social media accounts. And if it wasn't Dan Scavino, then who was it? I mean, that's the thing. That's the important. And I get why especially the under 30 voter. The under 30 voter again has lived through 9/11, a housing crisis, pandemic, the recession after that, 2 wars. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but they've lived through a lot. I mean, that's a lot just at the turn of the century to now. They don't maybe see the Trump ascendancy as the existential threat it is, and maybe I'm not even giving them credit because maybe they do understand it, and they're of the mind, burn it all down. We went over polling that showed that a lot of voters are like, tear it all down. So, mainstream media, Never Trumpers, Lincoln Project folks, Democrats, all focused on preventing a second Trump term. And don't get me wrong, I firmly believe that is something that all hands on deck going forward. But we also looked at that New York Times Siena College polling that showed some issues that I think folks thought, oh, well, this is going to be a blue wave. You've made women mad now. Where were Georgia's women yesterday? I'm sitting here reading Twitter X posts. I didn't even know there was an election. What do you say to that? Granted, I only had to, and I do a show 5 days a week where I focus on politics. So, okay, obviously that's a big deal to me. But if so much is on the line and so much is on the ballot, shouldn't you know that you have this opportunity to puncture the ballot, to participate? There were 4 state Supreme Court seats, and Democrats were able to rally one candidate to challenge one of the 4 all conservative seated justices. I talk a lot about 2016 because I feel like there are parallels. We have an incumbent president who is running for office in much the way that the incumbent party had its nominee, who was essentially thrust upon the American public. I mean, I know that the parallels are a little different with President Biden and with Hillary Clinton, in that there actually was a primary campaign, but there was also a lot of he's not a real Democrat. If you didn't register as a Democrat, you can't vote. And obviously the tipping of the scales within the DNC that sort of made it a fait accompli, although a little bit more of an embattled one than what we got this year. But you have to remember, President Biden didn't win the nomination through a normal primary calendar season. And so there are a lot of voters who are like, well, I didn't get to choose this guy. This wouldn't have been my pick. And I mean, I could sit here and go back and forth about, my belief all along that President Biden has had a pretty good presidency and should have been a one-termer from the jump. I think it would have been magnanimous. I think it would have made him something of an icon, something of a hero on the left. To go balls to the wall, guns a-blazing, knock out the wish list, and let the next person, whether it's Kamala Harris, whomever, take the mantle and dare Republicans to run against popular, ideological positions. Instead, we're kind of sitting here within the margins on the left of center going, oh, man, we know that inflation is what it is. And we're also, a lot of us, not stupid enough to think, oh, it's Biden's fault The right's going to tell you otherwise. We could sit here and nuance that, but it's not his fault. It's a global problem. And this country handled it better than most. But it doesn't take the sting out of the trip to the grocery store. And I could sit here and tell you that, we're watching now as Target and major chains and fast food restaurants are all finally saying, oh, we're going to lower prices. It's been kind of tough on the consumer lately. I mean, why are you doing that now? Why now? Thank you, but why now? What is it about now that makes this important? Is it the election cycle too? Is this corporate America's way of saying, you know what, this is not looking good for the incumbency, and we've had a pretty good economy under this president all along. Maybe we should soften the blow a little bit and try and help out so that we can maintain that good ride. Well, I mean, anyone who knows anything about economics and knows anything about job creation and knows anything about GDP growth knows that, yeah, the economy does seem to hum better under Democratic presidents and has so since the 1990s, comparable to their GOP counterparts. Given. I don't know, maybe that's something that's happening. But the kitchen table issues, again, I talked about Gabriel Sterling, who is one of the few candidates that I've even seen talk about housing in any way whatsoever on the campaign trail. And lo and behold, he won his primary race? You're kidding me. Huh. I've been saying all along, and again, I'm tuned in because I'm a realtor, that is a core issue. Meanwhile, Abby Phillips and CNN are still concerned about a second Donald Trump term and what it means. And she goes into some detail about what we can expect from that. So do we pay some attention to that? No, I think we have to. I think this is an all hands on deck, pay attention to everything, all the blips on the radar kind of election seasons. So she goes down the list.
Has given the country plenty of new evidence about what he plans to do if he captures the Oval Office. So let's go headline by headline. Lawfare. Trump plans to prosecute his predecessor, Joe Biden, for all of the many crimes that Trump says Biden has committed, but refuses to actually name. Saturday night massacres? Well, Trump says sure. He told Time magazine he would fire U.S. attorneys who don't follow his orders to prosecute his opponents. And consider hiring someone under federal investigation as Attorney General. Well, yes, Trump says that Ken Paxton is on his list of possible AGs. Fire the Fed chair? A close Trump confidant says, from jail, mind you, you can bet on it. Spark a trade war that could take money from middle-class wallets? That's under advisement, too. $1 billion quid pro quo offered up to oil executives? That's now under investigation by House Democrats. A plan for sweeping immigration raids, deportations, internment camps. Those are also being drawn up. Monitoring and prosecuting women who have abortions. It's up to the states, Trump says. Contraceptive bans? Trump now says never. But that's just hours after saying, we'll see.
Do you support any restrictions on a person's right to contraception?
Well, we're looking at that, and I'm going to have a policy on that very shortly. Things really do have a lot to do with the states.
Withhold funds from Congress? Trump says he can do that. Deploy the National Guard to cities on a whim. Trump believes he has the power to do that, too. But the same election deniers who tried to discard the Constitution in charge of upholding the Constitution, that is also part of Trump's plan. The civil service, you can expect that to be gutted. Social media posts borrowing language from Nazi Germany. Well, it happened during Trump's first term, and it's happening again now. Add it all up, and Trump has given the American people a pretty clear picture of how he plans to govern.
Again, I don't want to overreact too much to what we saw in yesterday's state primary results. Although I will say, if anything, the alarming result to be most concerned about is that fewer than 1.2 million Georgia voters voted. We have like 8 million or more registered voters in the state. It's like, what, 15, 18% turnout? There are so many who are, again, on social media talking about not even having known that there was a primary race after a couple of weeks of early voting and all the push from candidates and parties. I'm a little confused by this. And I fully realize, like, in the next 6 months, there's going to be a ton of media attention for the few contested congressional races we'll have, the few contested state house and Senate races that there will be, and there will be a few. If I had to guess, I think the Gabriel Sanchez victory probably gives Republicans reason to believe that there's blood in the water and they'll get behind Diane Jackson. I don't know. But I know this. I know that kid's running a campaign that speaks to the under 40 voter about issues that are important to the under 40 voter. And if I were a Biden-Harris person, or if I were a Georgia Democratic Party official, instead of, oh God, here we go, a progressive Bernie type Democratic socialist candidate, we need to distance, I would instead be embracing and saying, show us how you do that. What is this TikTok thing that, by the way, that we're trying to ban? Yeah, that is the sort of symbiosis that the left has to have, because we're a mosaic of factions with differing priorities under one tent. And about the one thing we know we can count on that brings us all together, that unifies us, is our opposition to the unfettered private equity, white nationalist, anti-diversity opposition party that we're trying to fend off, that's trying to fend us off. That's about the one thing that we all have in common. We've got to start showing that we can work together better to take down the common opponent, or else we're going to get the results we got yesterday in November and have to live with that for the next 4 years, except, of course, the Supreme Court nominations that we'll have to live with for decades. Back after this, The Ron Show on America One Radio. We're in the home stretch of The Ron Show on Wednesday. Thank you so much. Whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. If you hear that live between 9 and 10 or 5 and 6, and you're like, oh, man, I really would like to go back and hear this whole thing, you can. On demand at ProgressiveVoices.com via podcast as well. By now, you have heard this story, right, about Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito flying the U.S. flag upside down after the 2020 election. Again, let's go to Abby Phillips at CNN for the story.
A calling card for insurrectionists flying in plain view outside of the house of an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Tonight, the New York Times published a report capturing, through the interviews and photos, an upside-down American flag hoisted outside of Samuel Alito's home in Alexandria, Virginia. The pictures are from January 17th, 2021, 11 days after rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol to stop Congress from certifying the 2020 election. Now, Alito publishing a full-stop denial in response to the report, saying, quote, I had no involvement whatsoever in the flying of the flag. It was briefly placed by Mrs. Alito in response to a neighbor's use of objectionable and personally insulting language on yard signs. Now, we haven't yet heard from the Supreme Court about all of this, but what is missing from Alito's response? A denial that it happened at all, much less remorse or regret that it did. Also missing, any disavowal of the symbol claimed by those who sought to overthrow the government.
I mean, real men throw their wife under the bus, am I right? What does Harrison Butker have to say about that? So the way the story goes, apparently there was a neighbor of Alito's, and let's bear in mind that the justices all live near Washington, D.C., and that's pretty much a liberal bubble. Apparently there was a neighbor who either had signage or used to use the language a lot on the streets or in the avenue or whatever, the Trump, rhetoric. And so apparently that got under the skin of either the justice or, he says, his wife, and he or she, according to the justice, says, you know what? I'm going to show him. I'm going to fly the American flag upside down. One of the 9 justices on the highest court in the land, either he or his thin-skinned wife, I'm thinking he's not telling the truth, decided, well, I'm going to get back at this neighbor by flying the flag upside down. Not in reaching out to maybe it's a historic neighborhood and there's no homeowners association. I don't know. Maybe that's the case. Instead, not reaching out to local authorities to deal with, if this were signage, to deal with the colorful language of the signage, to have a rational conversation with the neighbor. You've got a justice on the Supreme Court who can't even get along with his neighbor enough to say, hey, listen, I get it. You're not a big fan of the man who put me in to the Supreme Court, who gave us the 6-3 majority. I get it. But listen, I got kids, I got grandkids, whatever. There are kids, there are grandkids on the street. Can we not? Something else, anything else that's not derogatory in such a foul-mouthed way. I mean, it's cool. Do what you're gonna do, but can we not have the F word emblazoned on your lawn, please? I mean, you mean to tell me that one of the 9 cool heads we're supposed to have on the highest court in the land couldn't somehow himself mitigate a situation like that in a manner more befitting than by flying the American flag upside down? In that moment, in that snapshot of our American history, 11 days after the insurrection attempt on January 6th, one of the 9 people we're supposed to count on to give us the wisdom and the jurisprudence to point this country in the proper direction judicially. He or his wife, he says his wife, what a guy, took matters into their flagpole and said, okay, I'm going to fly the flag upside down. This is another one of those things. I would say this to Fonnie Willis and Nathan Wade, too. This is one of those things where you're like, man, you know everybody's watching you. You got to act right. Or as my 6th grade social studies teacher, Mrs. Downs, would say, mind your P's and Q's. Never knew what that meant. Could look it up. I'm not going to. But mind your P's and Q's. I knew what it meant. It meant sit up straight, speak with a clear voice, be a model citizen, because everyone's watching you. When you're one of the 9 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, and I get it, he's had people protesting in front of his house, and it's been tense. I get it. Well, that is kind of what comes with forcing your will on the majority of the country that doesn't see things your way. But again, this is where I would also tell the majority, hey, here's an idea. Show up to vote every chance you get, because if you've got the numbers, and you do, then you start winning elections and you get to inflict your will as a majority on a very vocal minority. Now, I don't think whoever released this photo did so to try and embarrass Alito or his wife, if it was his wife. But I do think it brings up the very real concept of recusal. And I mean, we could sit here and point to all of the justices that Trump appointed when it comes to recusal for any case involving him and his immunity, which I believe they're still marinating over. But at what point are we as a country going to say, y'all, this Supreme Court is out of control? We've got a guy who has billionaire sugar daddies buying him RVs and his mama houses and vacations, and that guy is on the highest court in the land. And then we've got this thin-skinned, or his wife, individual on the court as well, flying the flag upside down to denote support of insurrection. These are weird times, my friends. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Listen on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com or via podcast as you are right now. We'll see you next time.